All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I just want to first and foremost say welcome and hello to everyone who's joined us today, all of our educators and teammates from around the world. We are so excited to be able to share all of our research that we have and resources today on assessments within STEM. So we are the SAM Labs education team. So we have Mackenzie Meixner, Jennifer Byram, Ashley Waring, and I'm Emily Deffenbaugh, and we are all former classroom teachers and are happy to bring all of our experiences and learnings to our topic today. We're going to go ahead and start off by passing to Mackenzie, who's going to begin by sharing the objectives of today's session and what we'll cover, and then go into research behind assessment in STEM.
Thanks, Emily. Welcome, everyone. So we're going to jump right into it. So we're going to get started, like Emily said, discussing the research behind assessment in STEM, kind of where we're sitting in the STEM education field. What does it look like? What challenges are teachers facing when assessing in STEM? What is an effective way of assessing in STEM? And what's an ineffective way? And kind of how can we support this process before jumping into what we've actually created for you today to support in that. Then we're going to go into why we have an interdisciplinary approach when assessing in rubric-based STEM assessments. And we'll go into how our 21st century skill rubrics are actually structured and vertically aligned across grade levels. And so we'll actually jump into what we've created, which are these rubric-based assessments and how they can actually be used in the classroom and across different grade levels or subject areas. So without further ado, we're going to jump right into it and discuss the research behind STEM assessment. Now, we did a ton of research on our own from various resources and studies to kind of bring together a holistic view of kind of where STEM assessment is sitting and how are teachers feeling about STEM assessment? What are these challenges that they're facing? And ultimately, how can we support in making it easier to assess in STEM in the classroom, as it's so vital and important. So to get started, we're gonna kind of discuss what we found STEM assessment to look like currently before we discuss the challenges around it and where it needs to go for effective assessment. So the most common approach to assessing in STEM is based, and we gathered tons of reports and articles around this, specifically on interdisciplinary STEM education. And the most common approach to assessing in STEM is a final product approach. So essentially, teachers are kind of taking a look at what the final product of a project or a design task or a design situation actually was. But as you may know, and you've experienced this in your classroom, that this can be problematic. So we wanted to start out with kind of discussing why assessing the final product can be problematic before we jump into the challenges around it. So first, it's problematic in that the assessment doesn't align to the skills that are built during the learning process. So basically what that means is we all know that STEM instruction is kind of three-dimensional, right? It involves many skills and modes of learning that are not measured simply by kind of grabbing and grading that final product or final project or prototype. And when teaching STEM, we carefully design lessons to include various disciplines to enhance the student learning and stimulate how knowledge is utilized in a real world situation. Now, for us not to test students in that same manner means that we're missing out on kind of that the true measurement of the skills that are built throughout that learning process. And when we're teaching STEM, students are being taught with interconnected projects that mix the various disciplines. And by assessing the final project, the issue is that we're kind of missing out on that real world complexity of the STEAM lessons and STEAM learnings. Now, the second reason that assessing the final product can be problematic is that it doesn't monitor the transdisciplinary skills needed to get to that final product. So by transdisciplinary skills, I'm talking the communication skills, the collaboration skills, the critical thinking skills, all of these skills that are needed and useful for students kind of beyond the classroom in whatever they pursue. But as teachers, we know that there's no standardized process or procedure for assessing these transdisciplinary skills, and it's often up to the teacher to integrate those skills into their instruction. So many teachers do naturally go with STEM to teach these skills because it's a perfect opportunity to build that holistic learner because STEM is built on things like critical thinking and group collaboration and communication and creativity. But when a teacher just looks at the final product, they're missing out on all of that research that went into and the collaboration with their groups as they try to kind of weigh the pros and cons of various solutions to a problem and come up with the most efficient and effective solution, or all of the communication and conflict resolution that goes into a group working through a project or a task. And so the issue with assessing the final product is that if we don't know how our students are kind of growing in these transdisciplinary skills, then we can't consistently monitor them and assess them. And so we need to make sure that it's kind of process driven, our assessment, as opposed to assessing the final product. Now, the final thing around a final product being problematic is that it doesn't measure kind of the iterative design process that STEM is built on. So one could say in all aspects of life that the process is arguably one of the most important aspects to actually getting to the end result, right? And so it's even more true in STEM instruction and learning because it's built upon a process of trial and error, a process of tinkering and failing. And none of these components are actually present if a teacher is just assessing that final product. So this is kind of where the research is sitting of how and why we're assessing final products, but also why they're problematic. So let's jump into kind of the challenges and how teachers find themselves in this boat of assessing the final product, but then also moving towards, okay, how can we fix this? How can we provide some resources and ideas to make it easy to assess the process of STEM? Now, this quote really stood out in the research, and it kind of, I think it gives a nice glimpse as to kind of where we're sitting as far as STEM education, but where we need to go. So while STEM education has penetrated many classrooms, most teachers have not received proper training on how to assess student learning in STEM. And so let's talk about the challenges that teachers are facing. So we're specifically going to be talking about effective assessment in STEM as opposed to assessing the final product. I'm going to be specifically referring to this process-driven assessment approach. So the first challenge is that there's inconsistent content and implementation, which ultimately leads to inconsistent assessment of STEM. So if you think about STEM education, it's obviously not as standardized as ELA or math. And so the STEM content and also the implementation varies across our country, across the states, across the districts, across schools, and then sometimes even across classrooms. And so in some classrooms, STEM might be a fun activity on Fridays. In other classrooms, it might be a daily class. But the point being that the assessment then is affected. How someone may assess for a fun STEM activity looks different from a STEM elective. And according to research studies that reviewed various STEM programs across states and districts, they found that while the stated curriculum was improving students' understanding of cross-cutting concepts and interdisciplinary skills, few of them actually assessed those skills. So as a result, the impacts of these programs were not being properly evaluated within those schools and districts because there was not consistent assessment. The second challenge to effectively assessing in STEM is that it's time consuming. And we know as teachers that time is so precious and that you're adding another thing onto the plate, especially when it comes to a process-driven assessment approach. You need to monitor a whole group of students going through an entire design process, and that can be timely. It's very time consuming, and hence that's why STEM teachers and science teachers and really anyone bringing STEM into the classroom end up assessing that final product as opposed to the process. So what we really need is a kind of a systematic and simplified approach to easily assessing this inquiry-driven process and all of the skills, including the transdisciplinary skills that go into that process. Now, the third and final challenge is that there's very few resources available to teachers to support in effectively assessing STEM. So it's very important to us, and that's kind of why we wanted to cover a webinar on STEM assessments, because STEM integration is not simply putting disciplines together, but it's intentional and it's specific. And therefore, all of the resources that we want to create also have to have that in mind. So it's not simply kind of putting things together, but it needs to be careful and intentional so that teachers have resources at their disposal to actually effectively assess the learning process of STEM. So now that we know a little bit more about the challenges, let's jump into, okay, Mackenzie, how do we solve these challenges? What do you have for us today? And this is really what we're going to be spending the bulk of our webinar on, but we wanted to kick it off with some research as to why we developed these rubric-based assessments. So first, we need to design more readily available STEM content that is intricately built for that interdisciplinary learning and practices. And I say practices because specifically it's important that we're bringing in that process-based learning as opposed to just taking a look at the final prototype or product of a project. Second, we're going to solve these challenges by creating practical and timely assessment tools and guidelines for STEM assessment. And we're going to get into those tools that we have for you in just a second. But third, we really want to kind of drive this integration of existing interdisciplinary STEM content, instruction, teacher professional development, and assessment to ultimately drive a holistic STEM movement. And if we can put all of those things together and all these pieces together, we're going to continually drive STEM learning and instruction in the classroom. So yes, we're going to jump now into what these rubric-based assessments look like, why we ended up going with rubric-based assessments, and I'm going to pass it on to Jen.
Thanks, Mackenzie. So as Mackenzie mentioned, in this next section, we're really going to be answering the questions, why use rubrics? And more specifically, why take both a transdisciplinary approach and a rubric-based approach when assessing STEAM? So ultimately, what we're really going to be doing right now is just build off of what Mackenzie shared in terms of assessing STEM as a process and not simply a final product. So if you could go to the next slide, thank you. So rubrics are nothing new. They are tools that are used frequently by you all in the classroom. They are used daily, weekly basis by educators. But for a moment, I do want us to just go back to the basics and ensure that we understand the importance of rubrics, especially when assessing something that can be very abstract or subjective like STEAM. So the first reason, students are often encouraged to show mastery or develop certain skills that are often deemed subjective. So an example of this could be writing, or even what we're discussing today, STEM. Yet typically they receive very little guidance on what the characteristics they need to display or grow are, or guidance on what mastery for that skill looks like. So students are really saying, hey, I'm trying to master this skill, but I don't know what mastery looks like, and I don't know what steps I need to take in order to show mastery and be proficient at being a communicator, at teamwork and collaboration, all of those different transdisciplinary or 21st century skills. So oftentimes with these skills being subjective, the reason that students receive little guidance is because there's also very little standardization in terms of how we assess or how we look at these skills in students. So by providing a quantitative way to measure success within each area, teachers are then able to gather and track usable data on student growth. So we're really looking to take something that's very subjective, very abstract, and start to quantify it. So we are now looking at what are developmentally appropriate behaviors that students at different grade levels should be developing and possessing in order to further these skills. Also, by using rubrics, teachers are able to see which students or groups are going to need guidance. And then this could also be used as a way for students to practice metacognition and reflect on their choices and progress as well. So rubrics can be used for that process-driven approach and could be included within the final grade, or rubrics could be used as students and teams are working together to get a clear snapshot of where each student and each group is within these transdisciplinary skills. So then the teacher can guide them and show them what behaviors they need to modify, what ways they could push themselves to become a better communicator, to become a better critical thinker. And then lastly, this is a really interesting piece of research that we found while preparing for this webinar, is that rubrics allow bias to be removed as all students are compared against the same standardized measure. There was a recent study that was completed by a professor at USC and then reported on in a webinar at Harvard Education. And it details how natural bias creeps in when assessing students on more subjective skills. Their example was writing. And by using a rubric, you allow all students to be compared against the same set of standards, thus reducing the bias in grading. So all four of these are really important reasons as to why we want to make sure we are assessing these transdisciplinary skills as students work through STEM activities or even cross-curricular as they're working through other group projects, to make sure that we are allowing students to develop, allowing them to grow, and allowing ourselves to kind of pivot and see where we need to guide students to make them better. So these skills that we're looking to assess with the rubrics are also known as soft skills. And they're not, like we said earlier, something that we typically formally assess, as we're much more focused on making sure our students are mastering the content so that way they can be college and career ready. That's a term all of us are really well familiar with. But if we look at the data, we see that these soft skills are just as important, if not more, than the academic skills. So according to LinkedIn's Global Trend Report in 2019, 92% of employers say that soft skills matter as much or more than hard skills or academic skills. And 89% say when a new hire does not work out, it is due to a lack of critical soft skills. So we are here trying to make our students college and career ready. And what we're seeing from employers is that they have these academic skills, they have the hard skills that we've been working to prepare them for, but they're really coming in lacking in these soft skills and these transdisciplinary skills. So ultimately, if we want to make our students college and career ready, then we need to be teaching and assessing these soft skills. And with that, we're now going to take just a slightly closer look. We've been using both the words soft skills, 21st century skills, transdisciplinary skills. They're all very much the same. These are the skills that are going to transcend into all subjects and areas of learning and work. So these skills are going to be your thinking skills, your social skills, communication skills, self-management skills, and research skills. And as former educators and you current educators, we know that these are skills students desperately need to work on. They need a lot of guidance in order to know what these look like as well. So that way they can become proficient and then they can be ready to enter into that workforce. So as teachers, we know that these are something that our students need guidance and support in developing, like we just mentioned, in order ultimately to become successful citizens. So ultimately, these are a range of skills that students need to master, which are relevant to various subject areas. So it's going to work for your STEM, it's going to be important in your science, it's going to be important in social studies, in reading and writing and math. But students are also going to need to be able to transcend them in order to support their lives within and beyond the classroom. And so this is where STEM is really great at that, because it's going to allow students to take real world problems and develop real world solutions while practicing these transdisciplinary skills, as opposed to seeing them in isolation here or there. This is when students are really going to get the opportunity to kind of transcend this knowledge. And by integrating these skills within the lessons, projects, and challenges, students are ultimately developing their abilities to become independent, adaptable, and socially responsible, which is ultimately our overall goal for students. So by ensuring that we are formally teaching and assessing students on their development of these transdisciplinary skills, what we're really doing is educating the whole child. And this is another buzzword that you frequently hear being tossed around in education. You want to make sure that you educate the whole child. And data is actually showing an emphasis on this, as this is proven to increase both student engagement and school effectiveness. A 2019 Gallup poll actually reported that 88% of superintendents agree that student engagement is a key measure of school success and effectiveness, while only 8% of superintendents said that standardized testing is a key measure of school effectiveness. So we see in education this really weird dichotomy where we know we need to be educating the whole child. We know we need to be focusing on these transdisciplinary skills. We know what we need to be doing, and we know that standardized testing is not a good measure of that. Yet we still have such a large focus on data points and student test scores, even though we know these are not an accurate measure of school performance and effectiveness. This is something that educators see every day, especially this time of year when the testing season starts to roll around. So while we know that educating the whole child is important, studies show that this actually isn't happening as student engagement significantly decreases throughout the year. So in a similar study, they reported that 74% of fifth graders are engaged in their learning, while only 34% of 12th graders are engaged. So what this shows us is that while we know we need to be educating the whole child, we're not doing that, and we're not doing it well yet. So from that, and before we take a look into the rubrics that we've been working on developing to assess these skills, I just want to make sure that there is common knowledge around the importance of educating the whole child. So why is this actually important other than just student engagement, right? There are other ways we could get our students engaged. Why is educating the whole child really a solid educational approach and a best practice? So first, educating the whole child and student engagement have a direct correlation to student success. But ultimately, this is because this kind of instruction is going to provide built-in differentiation, allowing students to see how their strengths can contribute and lead to success, either their individual success or a group's success. Ultimately, what happens is that students who tend to be marginalized begin to have hope for school success when they are invited to show their learning in different ways. So you're really just opening up the school to students who have different ways of learning, different ways of interacting and retaining and understanding information. And you're allowing them to show what they know, to show how they think, to show these different processes and skills in a way that allows them to find success. So these students could be your 504 or your IEP kiddos. They could just be the students who struggle with a traditional education setting, but are not being identified as either 504 or having an IEP. No matter what strengths or challenges they may face, educating the whole child ultimately is going to be a way that allows each student to find success within the classroom. And with that, I will pass it on over to Emily to actually go through our rubric development and breakdown.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. And so based off of everything that we heard from the research with Mackenzie and Jen, you're probably wondering what resources we created. And those would be our rubric packs that you will get to walk away with today. So I'm going to be answering the question how our 21st century skills rubrics were structured, and then how we ensured that they were vertically aligned across our grade levels. So before I jump into that, I wanted to start with this quote because it's such an important quote to consider from a really great resource that we added in the appendix. But in the past several decades, all the way up through very recently, we generally would ask students to solve problems that were already solved. We had answer keys. We knew what the expectations were. But now, as we're trying to get our students ready and prepared for their future, we are giving them problems that we no longer have the answer keys to. We're asking them to move to be consumers of knowledge, to applying what they're learning in real world context, in real world situations. So as a teacher, it may be difficult to effectively and explicitly teach, monitor, assess students to be prepared if we don't know what that answer is going to be, right? So we know from research, and we all know from our own teaching experiences, that when we assess students, we want to make sure that we are authentic in that assessment and that we are transparent in what we will be assessing. The student should know exactly what they're going to be assessed on. They should be able to set up and define their own personal goals. They should be able to monitor their own progress toward that success criteria that you set up with them. And we should be able to engage in feedback with them, not just teacher to student, but peer to peer, student to parent. There should be conversations around their learning. Now, when we teachers understand the exact strengths, the misconceptions, and the needs of the individual child, then you as a teacher could then set up your next round of learning with better accuracy and better precision. So keeping that in mind, Mackenzie, if you don't mind going to the next slide. What we've created for you is keeping that structure in mind. So we have two different packs, the teacher-facing pack and the student-facing pack. And the teachers can use the teacher rubrics, not just at the end of the project, but throughout the challenge or throughout the task at hand, as Mackenzie and Jennifer mentioned earlier. This is going to enable students to be able to take that metacognitive approach toward their own learning, where they understand what the expectations are at each level of the progression, and they'll be able to set their own goals and create action steps to help guide them toward that goal. Now, with the student pack, you can see that the students will be able to have access ahead of time so that they can realize what those expectations are in student-friendly terms. And they'll be able to monitor their own progress and receive feedback that they can put into action for the next stage of learning. On the teacher packs, the teachers, you'll be able to see the milestone set at each standard, not each standard, excuse me, at each proficiency. You'll be able to correlate the standards. You'll have a space to create feedback, notes for students or notes for yourself to annotate which skills you need to continue to focus on based off of observation as you see the kids work through the project. You can also see on the right side that we've broken them down into grade level bands so that the proficiency stages are age appropriate, and then they will grow in complexity as the kiddos have multiple opportunities throughout their academic careers to practice those same skills. If you don't mind going to the next slide. Thank you. So this is a quick peek at a teacher sample, and you can see that up at the top right corner, we put the grade level bands and designated that to help not only with organization, because there are several that go along with each grade level band, but also in case you need to differentiate based off of the class that you have. So if you're kind of on the cusp of between grade level bands and you really want to accelerate and push your students, you may want to go to the next level up. Or if you're focusing on a specific attribute that your students have never had the chance to work with before, you may want to go a grade level band down and work your way up through proficiency. You also might notice that the proficiency is defined at the top, along with the sub-skills on the left side, along with each grade level band. And there are very detailed descriptions of the criteria or the behaviors that are observed for each step of the progression. We also made sure that the progressive labels at the top indicate where each step is going to fall within mastery for those skills. And when we go to the next slide, you're going to be able to see a peek at the student sample. So this one, it's difficult to read because I know there's a lot on there, but when you get your pack, you'll be able to see these a little bit clearer, where the bulleted lists are in student-friendly terms and much easier to understand and read. The proficiencies match the graphics that help symbolize that attribute. There's a feedback section at the bottom so that they could, of course, read, learn, and grow from that. The progression headers incorporate tier 2 vocabulary to accompany with accompanying value points so that the kids know what each column is worth if you are going to be taking points for it, and also with visuals to show where they fall on target or where they are exceeding. We've also made sure to highlight the proficiency column on target so that they can visually see what they're aiming for within each attribute. And we've added little checkboxes for easy tracking and scoring. There is a clear total score for proficiency at the bottom right with an option for higher overall scoring if you want to include those acceleration points in there. Now, the reason we did this is twofold. One, of course, teachers can use it to grade at the end of the project, but as we mentioned before, the sole purpose is not to just grade the final project. We really would like students to be able to track their progress as they go and work on these skills. So students themselves can keep track of the scores using one of the resources that we created for you that you will also receive today in our appendix that tracks where they land at different points on the project. So we created progress monitoring sheets at each grade level band for you as well. Now, when first starting out, it's important to think about selecting the attributes within those proficiencies that are going to best align with the task or the project, focusing there first. And this especially may be true in the primary grades. Trying to put this type of rubric in front of first graders may be overwhelming at first. So you want to look at the proficiencies where they understand and starting small to grow as they become proficient in that specific skill. Now, the students may also want to show more growth. Sorry, Mackenzie, one more thing. Students may also show more growth in these in these skills with multiple opportunities to use these types of tools regularly. And of course, if they have that option to monitor their progress over time, they're going to become more proficient quicker. Okay, now Mackenzie, you can go to the next one. Thanks. So this visual, what I've done is created a graphic to show how we've ensured vertical alignment within the proficiency at each grade level band. So you can see here the rubrics focusing on the following proficiencies across all of the grade levels. We've got teamwork and collaboration, communication and voice, critical thinking processes, creative design and planning, global citizenship and impact, character and mindset, and digital citizenship. And you may notice that the 6th through 8th grade band doesn't have a separate rubric for digital citizenship, because those skills are absolutely necessary and required across all the proficiencies at that age. So therefore, we've embedded it in the first 6 rubrics. So there will be a technology component in all of the rubrics for the 6th through 8th grade band. You may also notice that the level of attributes and possible points increases through the years. So where there's kindergarten through 2nd grade starting at a 3-point scale, monitoring 3 different attributes per rubric, by the time they reach 6th through 8th grade, it's more complex 5-point scale with 4 to 5 attributes each. Now, if tools like this were used in multiple disciplines across multiple subjects and starting all the way as early as kindergarten, can you imagine the opportunities that the students would have to draw greater understandings of how all these skills that we're assessing can be applied in various contexts? And think about, going back to what Jennifer said about metacognition, how that would sharpen. They can gain clarity on being able to negotiate challenges that come naturally in the learning process. Imagine by the time they got to high school where they would be. So we're going to look at a quick example of this on the next slide, using one sample from our global citizenship and impact rubric. So here you can see 3 snippets, and they are of course growing in complexity as the students get older. So the top row shows the kindergarten through 2nd grade, just one of the attributes, where the focus begins with an egocentric to local and school and ultimately community perspective, learning about the viewpoints and seeing that people might look at situations differently. And the goal down at this level is just to see how they can play a positive role in their school or community and understand that their choices really do affect others, and then there could be more than one way to create a solution. Now, by time the students get between 3rd and 5th grade, you may notice that the scope is broadening from just local community to a wider state, regional, and national perspective, even up to global. They begin to learn the importance of considering different viewpoints, understand issues within different communities, and actively seek out how to contribute to these solutions. Now, finally, by the time they reach 6th through 8th grades, they're coming into view from the context of a global perspective, understanding causes and effects of decisions and how it can positively or negatively impact or affect people and the environment in different parts of the world. Additionally, students would be thinking about global issues and how they can be a global citizen, how they can take action, and how they can speak up for others who can't speak for themselves. So you can see that progression from kindergarten all the way through 8th grade. And if they're continually provided those opportunities, what they'll be like by the time they graduate high school. So now that you've seen a sample of the vertical progression, I'm going to pass it over to my teammate, Ashley, who's going to share samples of how these rubrics can be actually used in context across different sample STEM applications.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. I just wanted, just like we want our students to see and experience real world applications with what we're doing with them, we wanted to take a minute to show you how these rubrics would be used in the classroom setting. So Mac, if you'll scoot on to the next one, thank you. So I wanted to start with a K through 2 example. And I noticed in the chat some questions about using with kindergarten, 1st and 2nd graders. So hopefully this will help answer some questions. But so I set up a scenario where their students are in station work for a math block. So there's different levels of group work, independent work, and teacher-led activity within that space. And then you can scoot to the next slide. So I pulled one of our rubrics for our K through 2 band, actually, yeah. And this one was working together as a team. So if you're first introducing these rubrics, you wouldn't, with the K through 2 group of students, you wouldn't want to overwhelm them by trying to address each and every pinpoint on the rubric, every criteria. So I thought that starting with one band, one row would be a great starting place for students. So helping them figure out as they're working through those group work projects or collaboration pieces within those stations, helping them identify what actions, what behaviors the teacher is looking for, and then also giving them a starting place to reflect on their learning. And so what the teacher is looking for in this is for students to be working as independent groups within their group and express how they work together, able to brainstorm and apply their plan in making decisions in their solution. And then I've got an example for 3rd through 5th grade. This is actually a project I did with in my STEAM classroom with students. So we read the book Hurricane by David Weisner. And then students will have to, and this is more of a STEM specific example. So the other one was a math example to show that these rubrics can be used across the curriculum. But getting into this one is STEM based. So it's tying together all the different fields within this one lesson plan. So students have to construct a hurricane resistant shelter constructed out of recyclable materials. And they have to do that based off of research that they've done on what makes shelters hurricane resistant. So then the two rubrics I selected, which we'll go through, the first one is critical thinking processes. So this is the student-facing rubric that the students would have. And again, in just introductory phases of the rubric, I would focus on one of the three attributes. So I would go in with real-world connections and solutions for students to walk through. And where they're aiming to be is proficient in these categories. And then the other rubric that would be applicable here in character and mindset. And again, focusing in on one of the rows, perseverance and a growth mindset, because that's very important in a STEM iterative process that the students are working through in that design. And then for 6th through 8th grade, I pulled another math example of students working together in creating or finding volume and surface area. And then the rubric that I chose to work through that was creative design and planning, where students are able to, or what I would want them to focus on is combining materials and ideas in clever and imaginative ways. So really tinkering through independently and with teacher prompting would be the differentiator there. And again, we want our students to be approaching or proficient, but approaching accelerating in these categories. And the last example I have is, oh, sorry, you can just go next, thank you. A special education, so maybe you have a student with an IEP and they have a communication goal listed on their IEP, and this would be a great place to help facilitate their ownership and give them a starting place that they can start where they have a comprehension of what is expected and how to get there through teacher support. So the teacher is looking for the student to be able to share their messages at a good pace with a strong voice and articulate in a satisfactory way. And the rubric I pulled that one from is the next slide. It's communication and voice for the K through 2 grade band. And then with that, I'm going to pass it to Jen.
Thank you, Ashley. So many great questions and comments in the chat, and it's going to lead us perfectly into this next just section really quickly. So there have been some questions about, do these rubrics align to any of the content that we already have, or how can it be used with the content that we have? And so we are so excited because we are going to be continuing our mini little webinar series about assessments in STEAM again next week. So we have been really busy since January developing formative assessments for our STEAM and coding lessons that we have here at SAM Labs. And really just took into consideration best research practices while developing this, thinking about what are teachers going to actually need in order to assess these STEAM and coding lessons in their classroom, to know how to pivot and guide instruction based on the results that they're receiving. And then also continuing to take that rubric-based approach, but putting it into the SAM Labs fashion of our Let's Build Challenge 1 debugging portions for the 2nd through 5th grade kiddos, or our younger kiddos with the station rotation model. And so next week, we are going to be hosting our final webinar series on these assessments in STEAM. And so Mackenzie is going to be sharing the link if you would like to join us again next week. Great little tidbit about this session is that you're going to get to walk away with a sample formative assessments that we've built, so you can see what these formative assessments look like, as well as some sample assessment item banks. So We took all of the questions. They're all standards aligned as well, just like our content is, but we took all of our assessments, and for all of second grade, combined all of the second grade questions together and then organized them by standard. So that way you can really see how comprehensive we go within each standard. So you can see maybe where you can plug SAM Labs into your current science curriculum, or where you might want to add some of your current science curriculum to some SAM Labs lessons as well to help deepen the learning there. So we would love to have you join us again next week, same time, same virtual place. And then Mackenzie, if you would click to the next slide. We are so happy that you all joined us today. Again, my name is Jennifer. If you have any questions about the rubrics that we all covered here today, please feel free to reach out to us. All of our contact information is here. Emily, Mackenzie, Ashley, and myself would love to be able to help you and help answer any questions as you look to do some rubric-based assessments with your STEM activities. Yes, and connect with us on Twitter.
Just very quickly also to show you the appendix, which you will get access to the slide deck and a follow-up email after the session along with those rubrics. But we have some sample resources here with the student progress monitoring sheets that are editable and some other kind of resources that we use, as well as some of the articles that we pulled all of our research from. If you would like to check them out, they are all here on the slide deck. So without further ado, I guess we'll just end that there and pause and answer any questions that you may have. But thank you all so much for attending today.
Yes, we will make sure that we email the resources out. So you will be receiving the recording along with all the resources that were mentioned in the slide deck. And of course, all of the rubrics. You'll receive K through 8 teacher and student packs.
And be sure to check out those appendixes, the appendix, because we have lots of additional resources that we created, like Emily mentioned, like the setting goals sheet that students can work through to set their own goals, really add some student agency into the classroom, as well as the student progress monitoring. So that way, as they're setting those goals, they can actually progress monitor to see the progress that they're making on their way to achieving those goals. Okay, we have a question in the Q&A about the recommended logistics of when the rubrics should be filled out, class time versus outside classroom time, and how much time should be dedicated for teachers and students to fill them out. That is a really good question. I think there's multiple different ways, and Emily, Mackenzie, and Ashley, feel free to chime in if you have different suggestions. But personally, the way I would do it is I would probably, for each assignment, just really pick and choose 1 or 2 different rubrics. And then as I'm observing a group, I would just be jotting down different anecdotal notes about what I'm noticing for these groups, keeping that in a separate little group folder or group paper. So that way I have all of my notes as I'm seeing them work through those group projects together. And then from there, as I'm looking to assess these skills, I would start to mark them down on the rubric and then share that back with students, but also allowing students the chance to self-reflect as well as they're going throughout the day.
I think another, if you don't mind chiming in, another time management tip would be to not pressure yourself or your students to complete the whole rubric for every single activity that you do. You can always just pull out one focus point, one of the attributes within the criteria to address within that. So that can also help with making it a more time, because we know that time is the biggest thing as teachers from personal experience and everything. So yeah, I think that's a good tip.
I also think it does depend on the group of students that you have. So some are more independent and some need a little bit more guidance. When I did teach in the younger grades, so I was with kindergarten and first grade for a good long while, I felt that if I spent the time up front, it really helped in the long term for the kids to be more independent. So there might have been a lot of like modeling or role play or examples and samples the first couple months of school of, okay, this is what I mean when I say, and pulling something from communication or pulling something from teamwork and collaboration. And it does take a lot of instructional time to do that. But if you put that effort in at the beginning, then having those models and those expectations already set, the kids are a little bit better about being independent with understanding where they need to be and being able to set those goals. And I did it oftentimes one-on-one, which again does take a lot of time, but really it's hard to even pull small groups and say, you know, this is a goal you need to be doing if every individual student is learning differently. So having those little conversations and having that time where you guys can sit together just for a couple of minutes and say, you know, what is your goal in math, or what are we working on in science, or if it is for the specific STEM project that you're working on, just giving some time out of your day to meet with like 5 kids a day, and you can get through the whole class in like a week, hopefully, if you don't have a giant class size, to be able to set those goals and then check in with them like once a week, or, you know, a couple times a month, whatever makes sense for you in your context.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump into answering Ayo's question because it's a really great one about special education. So I think that when it came to picking a rubric for special education, it's all about what their IEP or 504 goals are. So specifically, if you have students who have some speech impairments and are seeing a speech therapist, maybe you want to focus on that communication rubric. If you have other students who have social emotional goals, you might want to focus on the collaboration rubric or on the character rubric. The character rubric's a really great one as well. It's kind of how are students kind of monitoring themselves as they're working in their groups. Are they not giving up? Are they exhibiting grit and perseverance in the face of challenges? So I think it all depends on what the IEP goals are and the 504 goals, but this is something, and I was a special education teacher, that I would definitely have in my hand, and I'm tracking that every day and using it across different subject areas as well, not just in STEM. I mean, you're going to see a lot of the critical thinking and students having to push through and debug and problem solve in STEM, but you're also seeing it on a daily basis in the other core subject areas. So I think that that's something that would be up to the STEM teacher, or really any teacher that would want to use these rubrics, because they are specific to what many students with IEPs and 504 actually are working towards and working on.
And to piggyback off of what Mackenzie just said, it doesn't have to be just the STEM teacher or just the gen ed teacher. It's a tool that can be used as a team. So when that child is with me, whether it's a small group, whole group in a gen ed setting, or if they are working with the speech therapist or whoever the adults are that the child is working with, it could be a traveling tool. It could be something that, you know, everyone is using, even like the tech specialist, the librarian, PE teacher, whatever you're tracking for specific goals, it can be a tool that's used by everyone, not necessarily just that one teacher. So that's kind of up to you as a team to figure out the best application and how that would work best for that student.
Any other questions? Thanks, Ayo.
Well, you guys were an amazing, very captive audience. We really appreciate the chat in the on the side, all the questions and comments. If you have any questions afterward, you think of something, please feel free to reach out to any of the 4 of us or any of the SAM Labs team. We'll make sure that we get you all the research, the rubrics, the resources that we mentioned before. And we really hope that you'll show up to next week to see our SAM Lab specific one that relate to our STEAM content.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day. And as Emily said, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.